Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to go right to the two provisions that I mentioned in my opening statement. Secretary Connor, Word of 2022 contained a provision that requires the Corps to track and provide an annual report to Congress on the timelines for completing environmental reviews. Seems to me you'd have that information anyway, but you come back now estimated that a considerable amount of funding is going to be needed to implement this provision. My understanding is that Corps districts and divisions already utilize software that allows them to track and upward report key activities. What is the status of that, and can I have your commitment that your staff will work with mine to identify a path forward so we can effectively implement this provision?
You absolutely have my commitment to work through if there is a quicker way that we can get the relevant information up and available for the public. Even if we move forward through databases, I'm happy to do that and look for alternative means. We want to be transparent. We want to get that information out. So the status of implementation, if I don't know if the chief has better information on this particular status.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ma'am, this is Section 8134 about NEPA reporting, and I think there's a disconnect between our teams on what the requirements are, and I think that just having a session on this, unfortunately, it's taken this long to get this conversation. We believe we're being asked to report on 150 or so feasibility studies and how they are working their way through 40 different environmental laws and regulations, and then have a public-facing website for that. If it's something less, that's a conversation we should have so that we can get moving.
So are you suggesting a meeting between our teams and your teams? Is that the teams we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am, our staff, so we better understand the intent of that particular
Well, I mean,
provision.
this has been, 2 years in the making here, so we probably should have had those called to our attention. Isn't this what you're asking for, another $3 million to implement this particular provision, correct?
So, ma'am, if that's the requirement to report on compliance with 40 environmental laws and regulations for those 150 studies and make it public-facing, yes, we would need resources.
Okay, so let me just ask a simple question. I'm sure you have in your work plans, where they're districts or whatever, they have steps and implementation steps. Certainly, they have some sort of flow chart that shows where they are.
They
Is
do.
it the public-facing part of it that's causing the delay?
I believe that combining all that across 42 districts into one central database would be the requirement, as we understand it.
Okay. Let's go to the economically disadvantaged communities and the CAP. You mentioned the CAP projects that are delayed. And so these are projects that need feasibility studies, federal interest determinations. I know that you have to use the rulemaking. So you kept referring to they, we, this on the guidance thing. If somebody's actually watching this and trying to figure out who is telling him what to do, who is that?
I'm going to be very judicious here. So just let's take 165. Fortunately, we were able to move forward without going through a notice and comment. We did go through an environmental assessment. We did make notice of funding availability, and we took in applications from the public, and now we're in the last throes of evaluating that and moving forward. So there, once again, we are more in control. With respect to 118, the pilot projects for economically disadvantaged communities, first we had to go through the guidance process to define economically disadvantaged communities. That took like 1.5 years.
Right.
And then when we go through the process, when we think it might be significant, or fall into that, we make our case as to why it is or why we think it's not.
Well, who are you making your case to?
That's initially to the Department of Defense, that we've got to
Okay.
get cleared, our proposed guidance cleared through DOD. Then it goes to OIRA
Okay.
within the White House. So there's 2 steps in that process, which complicates things from a time perspective and complicates things from people having different views than I do with respect to the significance of any particular action. So those are the specific steps.
So anybody listening says that's bureaucracy with a capital B. And so let me ask you, on the 165 projects, when do you think those will come out? You said shortly? What's shortly? Summer?
Yeah, I'm proposed to make those decisions here in the next couple of weeks. Then got to get that cleared through the administration process. So I'm hoping, given the the urgency, the need, and the fact that this is pretty straightforward stuff, that we can move out in end of March, end of April timeframe.
Okay. The Fiscal Responsibility Act contained various amendments to NEPA intended to improve the environmental process for all types of projects, including water resource projects. In prior orders, Congress has provided the Corps with specific authorities to improve this process. Can you describe what actions the Corps has taken to ensure that the agency is compliant with these new statutory requirements? And have you identified any additions? I don't know who would be best to answer this question. General?
Yes, ma'am. So we certainly have taken advantage of the $160 million in bill funding for our regulatory teams to help us with much of this environmental work. No one wants to get through NEPA within 2 years more than the Army Corps of Engineers. Unfortunately, this is very litigious on a number of projects. We're not given the easy ones, and we're asked for a lot of decimal points in our analysis. Social cost of carbon, greenhouse gas emissions, multiple options in each one of these, and that level of effort simply takes time.
Is the social cost of carbon part a statutory part of NEPA?
So, ma'am, we could pick up a pipeline, and a typical analysis will be, okay, what's the social cost of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions for moving that product through a pipe? And now we'll be asked to do the same to compare that for the trucks that would haul those fossil fuels to market.
Well, I guess what I'm asking, is that a statutory part that it has, or is that just what the administration's telling you to do?
It's part of the NEPA regulations now
Okay.
to do that.
The CEQ came back with, right?
Right.
Which just elongates the projects, makes them more expensive, and in some ways, they're not getting done.
I understand your point, and it has complicated us to figure out what life cycle we're looking at with respect to greenhouse gases. We're working through that right now, but once we get that, then I think the social cost of carbon aspect of it is actually pretty straightforward to move forward. And as General Spellman, we're fully committed to working through NEPA, to using EAs as much as we can as opposed to full EISs. The reality is when we get into certain projects, and Senator Kramer is very familiar with one and would like me to move much quicker, we get 300,000 comments, 30,000 substantive comments. These are incredibly complicated. I'm talking about Dakota Access. And we have to work through that to ensure that hopefully it's a longer process, and that's provided for with limited exceptions, even with the Debt Limitation Act. But we've got to do it to make sure we can survive any litigation so we can make our decisions stick.
Thank you. One question, apologies to those I'm jumping in front of. General Spellman, you mentioned the challenges posed by the social cost of carbon to project development. Has the interagency working group consulted you in the development of those figures? Have you had any input with their conversations with them about this?
Ma'am, I could follow up specifically what level in the field where we're doing many of these pipeline EISs, to
Right.
what level we're engaging with that group.
Well,
I have
we've
not
been
had
trying.
any personal interaction.
Okay, we've been trying to find out how these costs are calculated and what the cost is. So while you're looking at that, could you find out what figures you are using? Are they the same ones that the EPA is using in these regulations? And have you committed to the interagency working group that the social cost of carbon is hindering your ability to meet your statutory guidelines under the NEPA process that we put into effect 2
Yeah,
years
I think I understand the question, ma'am. All of our calculations are in the draft EISs and all of the regulatory products that we produce when we go through the NEPA process.
you
It's
have
all
a
there for the
cost-
public to see.
Okay, so you have a cost assigned there, but do you know how what dollar figure they're using to social cost of carbon? There is a dollar figure associated with this, right?
There is a dollar figure per...
What is that? Do you know?
I don't have that. We're happy to respond about our interactions with the interagency group as well as the
Okay.
specifics.
Okay, and then last thing for questions for the record, I want to submit a question on the hold and save clause. Thank you very much.
Without objection.